All right, I don't know what time it is on your clock, but I know what I'm getting ready for. It is time for the Professional CISO Podcast with David Malaco.
Welcome, one and all, to the Professional CISO Podcast. I'm your host, David Malaco. This show is an exploration of the topics necessary to transform the role of the CISO into one of a professional. All right, gang. Today we have an interview with a leader in the insurance industry around security. His roots are in network security and bug bounty. And notable things about our guest today, he has studied commercial art design, which when I first heard that, I kind of got floored a little bit, which was awesome. But maybe hear a little bit more about that. He is also a ham radio enthusiast. All right, so real quick, let's start talking about being a professional CISO. In today's episode, our guest is Matt Walker. He is currently the Managing Director of Security and Compliance at Goosehead Insurance. He has held positions at Bain Company and Dell. Please welcome Matt Walker.
Thanks for having me, David. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get started like we always do. Need a little background on Matt Walker, right? So give me that 1 to 2 minute. I really like to hear about where your first run-in with technology kind of came into your consciousness, whether that was single-digit age, maybe teenager, whatever that looks like. And then talk me through the arc, right? Up all the way until today.
Absolutely. So I grew up in rural Idaho. Computers were 10 years behind everybody else. My first real exposure wasn't until college, and that was Photoshop 3.0, I think, back then. And I went to college for commercial art. I thought I was going to be a sign designer and a set designer and doing fantastic creative builds all the time, and got into a sign shop right out of college. And the sign shop owner came up to me one day after work and said, "Matt, I hear there's this thing called the internet and I want all 8 computers in this shop to have it. Can you make that happen?" And I went very rapidly from a commercial art designer to a network engineer and computer guy, right, for the sign shop. And that was what got me thrown into it. And then did that for a couple of years, moved on to Dell. And Dell at the time, early 2000s, had the best training and mentoring program that you could ever imagine for anything compute, right? So, I went in and did server support, and then really cut my teeth on everything technical support at Dell, and then moved up into their pilot projects team and worked with some of the Dell leadership there on multiple different projects for, their image restore project was one of the big ones that I took on early on in my days. And that was back before people had the ability to reset their PC to factory defaults. Now that's built in. People don't even think about that.
Right.
But back in the early 2000s, to have a command to just, it'll automatically reinstall the OS and it'll be just like it was when it came from the factory. That was pretty game-changing back then.
Right.
And then, I went from there to leading the technology behind the Dell stores that never really opened. They opened a couple. They competed with Apple. We determined that it wasn't, at that time, the best profitability move for Dell.
Right.
And that project is actually what introduced me to Bain. Dell had hired consultants to come in and run numbers. And at Bain, they kind of saw what I was doing for the Dell stores and slid their business card across the table and was like, "You should come check us out." And ended up working at Bain & Company for 16 years, ran the whole gamut of network security, help desk leadership, security architecture and engineering is where I ended up there at the end of the day, within their global security team, doing everything imaginable for security. And then through that, made the move over to the security leadership at Goosehead Insurance, and that's where I've been for the past year and a half now. So
was there a time, right? So it's interesting that you were kind of like, you went from this design side of the house to, on computers, and then, hey, I need these networked. And you said, you were another 3 or 4 years there at the sign shop.
Yep.
Where did that cutoff in your mind happen where you're like, okay, yeah, I'm doing this, but I'm no longer going to go do the sign and design side of things, and I'm really now my career is I'm a computer professional?
I don't think that ever happened while I was at the sign
Really?
shop. I was the designer that just knew how to make all the computers work, and I was really good at it. And I think my first day at Dell is when I made that switch.
Interesting.
From, hey, there's more to these computers than just making cool graphics, but you can actually achieve some really cool business results, beyond just the graphics design side of the house. And that's when that switch in my mind flipped. And it became more of, can you understand how this works at the fundamental level, right? Like one of my favorite interview questions when I'm interviewing for people today is, tell me the process that a computer goes through from the moment you turn it on until you hit a Google web page.
Wow.
Right? Because that's going to tell me if the person is technical enough to understand kind of how the BIOS boots the machine up and all of the technicalities that go into the operating system starting and running, and then the full network stack. Like, how do you get the Google web page displayed on your screen? And that's kind of what drove me to continually learn about technology. Was I just wanted to understand how it all worked. And once I started to understand how it really worked at that fundamental level, that's when that shift in my mind happened from, this is something that we can use, to this is something that needs to be secured. And if you don't do that, the risk that it presents to a business can really quickly blow up. So, back in the mid 2000s, it was, let's install antivirus on every computer, right? Everybody, oh yeah, that's table stakes, you got to do that. But back then, it wasn't as common, right? You would see computers without an antivirus. You would see computers without disk encryption. You would see computers without passwords. And I think as time has evolved and as we've all kind of grown up and matured, we've started to delineate what are these table stake functions that need to be in place to keep a computer system secure, but also allow it to be worked for the business, right? At the end of the day, I think any CISO would say, well, I can make it secure, I'll just turn it all off. But that also shuts down the business. So you have to figure out where that balance is between those things that you're securing and how much of a speed bump you want to introduce to the business, or do you want them to operate in a different fashion to remain secure, to remain compliant?
Love it. Okay, so now we're going to kind of go into the premise of the show generally. What I always like to say is, this means a very different thing to many different people, and that's by design, right?
Yeah.
And so do you feel like we must professionalize our role as CISOs, as security leaders? If so, what does that mean to you, right? Like, am I putting out a misnomer here a little bit? Or
I don't think so.
If not, why? Right?
Sure.
And that's okay, because that's what we're here for, is those robust discussions.
Yeah. So short answer, yes. The role needs to be professionalized. Longer answer, it depends on the business still, right? There's a lot of businesses that are still very immature in their cybersecurity journey, and bringing in a, tenured professional CISO who's built programs from the ground up might be jumping the gun in those instances. But for a publicly traded company who's got that established maturity, there is a need there for a professionalized role. And the equivalent that I kind of think through is the role of a CEO. Is the role of a CEO professionalized? When that business first started, I don't even know if he called himself the CEO, right? He might have just been, I'm the guy that owns the business out of my garage and I'm running it, but now maybe it's a multi-billion-dollar company, and that role has gone beyond just, Bob running this business out of the garage.
Right.
And there's been that evolution to the business that requires the professional role now. And you'll see those businesses bring in attorneys. They'll stand up a general counsel. You'll see those businesses bring in CPAs to stand up their finance and run their finance side of the things. But then what we're seeing a lot of is the IT guy who's been around for 20 years is now their cybersecurity leader. And that doesn't always work, right? Because you've brought someone along on that journey who doesn't have the outside expertise, who may have never lived through an incident to know what does proper response look like, what does my incident response plan look like, have I tested it, have I proceduralized it, and you just get a smattering of security tools from those types of scenarios where that's just been homegrown IT, right? They'll have one of every tool, so their bases are covered, but it's not necessarily deployed in a way that's easy to manage or easy to grow through, right? So if the company is continuing to grow, a lot of those smattering of tools can become a management challenge for whoever is deemed with that task. So, to answer that question of do we need to professionalize? Yeah, we do. But I think there is still an ongoing discussion of what does that really mean that we still all have to hash out, right? And by we, I mean CISOs, right? We're going to have to figure out what does that professionalization look like? Is it joining some sort of a union, even though I don't like that word, association, right? But there's things like that are already out there. You've got like ISC squared. You've got ISACA. You've got even the EC Council stuff, their new certified CISO. But do any of those really qualify as the mark of a professional like it would for a lawyer who's passed the bar? And that's where I think our real challenge is okay, how do we actually get ourselves to that level to where we can say, yeah, we've passed that minimum knowledge requirement to be, stamped with, yes, you're the professional to come in and lead this cybersecurity or this risk program for this business.
So I'm going to put you on the spot then, because the premise of the show obviously is everything that you just said, right?
Yeah.
To have that discussion. So where do you sit on that? Where is Matt's opinion, not the opinion of your employer or anybody else, but what are your thoughts around that? Where should we be heading, do you think?
We need to get to a level where the CISO role has that stringent accountability, right? So is it passing a certification test? Maybe. Which ones? That's debatable. Is it providing a certain number year of experience? Maybe. That's debatable, right? You have lawyers and CPAs who come in first year and they get top positions at some firms and companies without that years and years of experience. So that's debatable. But, I think it needs to look at, do you understand risk? Is there a way to define what that understanding means? Can you do things like implement FAIR when you're analyzing risk? Can you do things like measure how a business is doing against the different CMMC maturity levels to help establish where to grow a program? Does the professionalization require some sort of external stamp, right? Like you look at like a CISSP exam, someone else has to vouch for you and say, yeah, this person is legit. They've got the background experience, they've worked in it, and I'm, if I'm signing off for somebody, yeah. So, when we look at all of those things, I think those are all great starts. There's other organizations out there like the Cyber Future Foundation that, Val is here in this area, and they're doing great work in starting to lay down what a charter looks like for the professionalization of the role. And I think we're getting there, but I don't know that we've all agreed on what that looks like yet.
How do we get that consensus? Like, is there a path? Because I
think
always say this like almost every single episode where if you ask 5 CISOs, you're getting 6 different opinions,
That's right?
because we all, I can say, in the discussions we've had with our group local here, it's very, very similar. So is there ways that we can grab that consensus?
I think it's going to come from regulatory measures, right? We look at what the SEC did with Tim Brown last year. There was a lot of uptick in, okay, how is a publicly traded company going to do an 8K now, right? How are we going to disclose? What do those timeframes look like? And that started to establish some of it, right? But that's just for public companies and just for that small slice of it. And I think that as time continues to move on, more and more regulatory things are going to come out. And eventually, we're either going to rise to the challenge or it's going to crush us, and enough of us within all industries are going to come out and say, hey, this needs to change, and here is what we're doing to overcome this, and start to figure out from those regulations that get pushed down what that professionalization needs to have as the bare minimum.
A little bit of a hot sports opinion here, but from my perspective, I think we have it in front of us very similar to what happened with PCI a long time ago, where the payment cards were going to get regulated, and they decided to take that off the table by regulating themselves. And I think we as a group of professionals have to organize in a way that's meaningful to be able to push the change that we're looking for. Right, because the only way that we're going to get it done is by putting it in our own hands. And so, but I'm right in line with what you're saying for sure. I'm maybe a little bit stronger on the head on that one, because I'm not seeing it any other way. If we leave it to somebody else, I think you're right. We'll get crushed, and somebody else is going to take on what we're doing, right? And then we'll be left as kind of these technical, practitioners doing technical things versus being business technology risk advisors.
Right.
So, all right, I'm off my soapbox. All right, so let's shift a little bit. We talked a little bit about risk already, but talk to me about your perspective on technology risk and how it relates to business risk. I want to hear this. We talked about this a little bit the other day, and I want to hear your take on that.
Yeah. So technology risk as it pertains to business, I think at the end of the day, what is asked of me is so what if this data gets out? What does it mean, right? So, our job at the very fundamental level is protect that CIA triad, right? So if one of those legs of the CIA triad breaks, what is the so what? And being able to clearly explain that in a way that all of the other business leaders will understand is the challenge. So when we have technical risk, right, you and I can understand what it means to be unencrypted. You and I can understand what it means to have open, external-facing, internet-accessible devices. But we need to be able to paint those types of technical risks in terms that the business will understand. So for those open internet-facing ports, it's, if we were a bank, those open ports would be the equivalent of the lock boxes in our vault being wide open for anybody to come and look in. Right. If we were worried about the device encryption, it would be like if we were a postal carrier, but every letter was open and people could read it if they chose. Right? So there's that exposure that you're able to relate back to the business and say, hey, this is a technical issue, but here's what it means at the end of the day for the business. It's data exposure, it's loss of confidentiality, it's, maybe we've made our data more available than it should have been. A great recent example is the national public data breach with everybody's social security number. And it turns out there was just a zip file available on their public website. That's what it's looking like was the culprit.
I had not heard that yet.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just wide open, just sitting there. So, when we have that technical risk sitting in front of us as, technical leaders, we get why it's so important to fix it and to resolve it. The challenge for us is, can we explain that risk in simple enough terms that my non-technical board members will understand it and agree to either helping provide resources for us to fix it, helping provide money to help us fix it, or agree to accept it and say, you know what, even though you as security leader have identified this risk and you've said you're not willing to live with it, we are, right? It's about taking that risk that, I'm unwilling to accept in this instance and finding the correct liaison within the business to say, I will take that risk. I will accept that risk. That way, when the breach happens, because it's not a matter of if, it's when, at least we've been able to show that we've done our due diligence in explaining to the business why that was a risk, why those open doors, why those unlocked things were important, and what our advice at that time was.
How did you, one of the things you said earlier was the what happens if question.
Yeah.
How did you get to a point where you were comfortable answering that question and able to translate it at the same time?
To be honest, that's still a challenge.
I agree.
Right?
That's why I'm asking it.
Yeah. I think the comfort level arises from seeing these types of incidents at other companies, right? Because then it helps your C-level peers and your board see what's in the news. And it's, I'm able to say, hey, we don't want to be that guy. Right? So in order for us to not be that guy, here's a list of recommendations, right? So that's how I've gotten comfortable explaining it to the people that I need to explain those things to. When it's a new discovery, when it's novel, we really have to rely on each other as community to say, hey, did you see that new IPv6 vulnerability that came out this week from Microsoft that's breaking the internet now? That's something that I'm still trying to figure out how to put into the non-technical term to explain to my business. And when something new and novel like that comes up, it's important for us to have these kind of relationships to talk to each other about it. It's important for us to have outside expertise that we can lean on, right? There's different collaboratives out there. There's different groups that you can be a member of to help you really understand the issue. But you have to not just understand the technical side of it. You have to really be able to say, okay, the technical side means this. So, that IPv6 exploit that just came out. Okay, so I've got something that can hit every Windows machine in my environment. What is the so what? Well, does my security program keep all of those Windows machines patched? Does my SIM monitor for any indicator of compromise that might be tied back to that new vulnerability? Does my security department have a way to go through and check off any risks that may be accepted because of this? So maybe there's a legacy system that runs some sort of IoT or OT that we just can't touch.
Right.
So there's a risk there that has to remain. And being able to then put all of that into a risk register that you report on and take back to your board and say, here's where the open issues are. You don't need to understand the technical, but the so what is, we've taken all of these other mitigations and put them around this thing. So we think it's safe, but as your cybersecurity leader, I want you to be aware that this risk exists, right?
So as, and similar to what you're talking about, we're going to change subject a little bit, but there's a string that ties it together, right? So we're talking about speaking to your stakeholders, your board, your executive level, and it's not a vacuum, right? It's not a case of you're going in and everything's pristine. You may be walking in trying to be this translator of technical risk into business risk in the middle of some sort of potential conflict, political conflict, something like that.
Sure.
So talk to me about how you, identify, like how do you read the room at the given time? You know, because here I am, I'm about ready to drop this grenade in your room, you know, from a technical risk perspective. How do you read that room when it comes to those stakeholders?
Yeah, that's where building that relationship with your stakeholders is so critical, right? You've got to understand everybody in the room on a more personal level than just let's get business done. When you walk into that tense situation, say I've found a risk that I've deemed unacceptable, but I know that another department is coming to this meeting to ask for the moon in terms of budget. You know, it's important to have that level of trust and relationship with your counterparts so that when they come in and ask for the moon and I'm just asking for a piece of cheese or whatever,
On a cube.
that it doesn't come across as diminishing what the business needs to accomplish, right? I'm not trying to come in and say, hey, this cybersecurity thing is a showstopper, right? Because we've lived with it for 20 years. It's not stopped the show yet, but it is something we need to really focus on, and it is something that will become an incident with time, right? It's impossible for us to predict when that will happen, but we know that if we don't address it, it will crop up at some point. So you have that level of trust and relationship with all of your counterparts, right? Whether it's just going to lunch with them once a month, whether it's, you know, just jumping on a quick 5 or 10 minute call before the meeting and saying to them, hey, what are you presenting? This is what I'm thinking of. Can we team up here? It helps to ease any of those tensions when you walk into the room, right? If you know everybody, if you trust everybody, it helps put everybody on the same page. The other thing that I would say that's really important to do is ensure that you remain diplomatic, right? Because you may walk into a situation where different arms of the business are at conflict with one another. And that conflict could potentially lead to a cyber risk. You know, it could create a bad work environment. If one department feels like they're getting shorted, you might end up with disgruntled people, which is a risk. Right. So you have to remain diplomatic there and help the people that might be at odds understand that, hey, we're senior enough within the company that what you're doing does have that trickle-down effect. So let's work together, right? Let's be on the same page here. Let's support each other. And, you know, if you feel like you're getting the short end of the stick right now, well, let's make that known in a diplomatic way so that everybody knows that, hey, when the next budget cycle comes up, we're going to address that. Or, you know, hey, that's not on the table right now, but it's definitely in the backlog of issues. It's not going to go away, but we're just saying not at this moment, right?
Quick follow-up. When I first met you, I kind of pegged you as a quiet person. And not necessarily an introvert per se, because I didn't feel, because once we started talking, it was, you know, for our folks that are relatively quiet people out there, how did you have, like, is this like, it's because it's my work, I'm good, I can go engage? Is there a personal inside piece that you have to kind of, you know, get over a little bit to go in and plug in with these kind of folks and get outside your box a little bit? Talk to me through your inside process on this type of engagement.
Yeah, there definitely is, right? You have to be willing to put yourself out there. You have to be willing to say, all right, let's let's not just be the introvert that, hides in my shell. And I can do that. That's easy for me because that's how I am. But you have to really be open to someone telling you no, right? I'm sure we've all heard it, like growing up, your mom would always say, what's the worst they're going to tell you? No, right? But really, that's it, right? You don't be afraid of no.
Right.
And then that helped me to open up and go towards some of those relationships and just building that repertoire with people, right? It's okay to say, hey, you want to go to lunch? If they tell you no, okay, well, I'll ask next month, right?
There's a line of thinking of go for no, right?
Right.
Which is go until the point where they tell you no, and then you know where you stand and you can work around that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Totally agree.
So, and I think that for people that kind of fall into the introvert, or for people that don't want to stand up on stage per se, you just have to expose yourself to it more and more, right? The more practice you get doing those things, the easier they become. And it does take practice. It does take time to get good at speaking to the room, to get good at reading the room, and just knowing that when you look across the table at anyone else in your C-suite, being able to kind of see what their body language is, right? The only way to get to that point is to go for the no. Right?
Love it. All right. We're up on time.
All right.
It always goes fast, doesn't it?
It does.
So it is time for 10 questions. So now we have 10 questions with Matt Walker.
Let's do it.
What's your favorite word?
My favorite word is harmonic, right? There's a lot to that, because it could be everything is working peacefully. It could be, a beautiful song, right? So it's just an overarching idea of, everything's got a stable flow. Everything sounds good together. There's no conflict, right? If things are harmonic, things are nice.
What's your least favorite word? And don't say disharmonic.
Complexity. Complexity.
Yes.
Yeah, and maybe I'm not, the word is not my least favorite word, maybe, but the thought behind it, right? If someone comes to me with just a massive ball of tangled issues, and they say, Matt, I've got this really complex problem. I love solving it. But when it's complexity, like just for the sake of being complex, I don't like that. That's no fun.
What area of your work do you find most interesting?
The people, right? Because you never know what you're going to get. With cybersecurity work, if you lock down a firewall port, you know that that's locked. If you put a policy in place and you've got a technical control to enforce it, you know that's good. But you never know what the person's going to say. You never know what the person's going to do. And to me, you always find interesting stuff there, always.
What area of your work do you find most challenging for you?
Being a salesman, because I'm not a sales guy. But as a cybersecurity leader, it's critical that we are able to sell our ideas to other leadership at the company. And to me, that is the most challenging bit of it all, because I'm not a salesman.
What sound or noise do you love?
I'm a big fan of classical guitar. Just about any classical guitar solo song. It's very relaxing. It's nice to listen to. That's the sound I love.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Tires screeching in a car crash. That's when there's an incident or an alert or something like that, that's the sound that goes through my head is, okay, are we buckled up? Right. Are we ready for this that's just happened?
Right.
Yeah.
What's your favorite curse word?
When I'm alone,
Sure.
it's
I mean,
MF.
you don't have to say it.
Yeah, no, it's motherfucker. Like,
Okay.
oh, this has gone really bad.
Yes. So in the Samuel L. Jackson vein of
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
okay, I got you.
But when I'm around people, especially my team, if they hear me say, "Gosh darn it," they know that's my clean version.
That's your PC version.
That's my PC version. But that's how they know something's really gone derailed. Matt's saying, "Gosh darn it," over there at his computer screen. It's yeah.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I have two answers.
Okay.
One is for like that personal satisfaction, personal growth side, and it's being a teacher, right? I think teachers are way underappreciated in our society today. That's why I never went down that road. But I really do love teaching. I love sharing what I know. I love seeing when someone else gets the idea and they light up and they understand it. I think that would be very fulfilling. But the other answer to have fun would be, let me go be a rock and roll guitar player.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine how fun that would be? Just going out, being on stage, rocking a crowd. Like, that would be a ton of fun.
I agree.
Yeah.
What profession would you not like to do?
Man, anything that, like, a kid's phlebotomist, right? Like poking little kids with needles just pains me.
Oh, yeah.
And the people that do that kind of work, like, wow. But that's something that I just could not ever see myself doing.
I agree. All right, final question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear your God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well done, good and faithful servant.
Love it.
Welcome. Yeah.
Matt Walker, everybody. Thanks,
you, sir.
Matt, for coming on. Appreciate it. I always thought I needed to have that clap track in the back. Well, in this episode, we talked about, obviously, professionalized role in the CISO. Matt had some great takes on that. I appreciate that. We kind of had a little bit of that conversation the other day, so it was great. We talked about risk and what does that look like, especially technical to business. And obviously, we talked about how do you make sure that you're engaging with the C-suite relative to maybe conflict that you find there, or political, little political enclaves maybe. So in the end, colleagues and friends, I renew the call. It's time to professionalize the role of the CISO. In the meantime, I wish you health, happiness, and success on your journey in becoming the professional CISO. Let's do this.
We're professionalizing the CISO role, so please subscribe to the Professional CISO podcast.